It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeneuve.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, Flo. We're going to focus today on a stereotype about the French that actually is backed up by quite a lot of data. You're going to explain. The French have a reputation of being the world champions in pessimism.
Absolutely. It's a very persistent cliche. Apparently, we love to complain. We're a little bit negative, and we tend to see the glass half empty, the wine glass, of course. Now, as you said, though, this one is backed up by significant statistics. Year after year, polls after polls suggest that the French are very pessimistic. In fact, in 2011, there was a BVA Gallup study that found that France was the most pessimistic country in the world, behind war-torn countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, that was a little bit of an extreme poll there, but interestingly, the French are the very first to admit that there is some truth to this cliche.
These days, I don't think there's much to laugh about.
Here we complain a lot. We complain about everything.
We lack some positivity. I really believe that. It's true, the French love to complain.
Now, I don't know if you heard, but that woman in French said râler. It is such a key word that sums up French pessimism.
And it's our word du jour. Râler means to complain, to grumble about things, and it's conveniently summed up by a noise you might hear a lot in the back of the throat. Now, the word râler actually comes from a breathing noise. It's a rasp or a gasp. And le râle, for instance, is the raspy noise that a dying person...
The death rattle.
The death rattle, exactly. Now, in France, râler has become somewhat of an art form. Just listen to the comedian Olivier Giraud. So he has an acclaimed show, How to Become a Parisian in an Hour, because after all, the Parisians are the national champions when it comes to complaining.
We complain all the time. It's a vicious cycle. You complain all day if you miss the metro or you have to wait for your coffee for 5 minutes. It's a way of life.
Okay, anybody who's spent time here knows that the French love to complain, but I guess the real question is, what are they complaining about?
Well, there's some timeless classics like death and taxes, but the main source of French pessimism is the future. You can see here, 84% of people worry about their future. This is a poll from 2019. Now, their fears about purchasing power, unemployment, retirement, raising inequalities, but also climate change. In fact, let's take a look at another poll. This one's from 2018. Only 12% of French people believe that the next generation will have a better life than their own. That is a pretty bleak outlook on life, and it can have some very serious consequences. France actually has Europe's highest rate of the usage of antidepressants and one of the highest suicide rates as well in Europe.
Now, some people might argue that the French don't really deserve to be pessimistic, given the relatively high standard of living we have here.
Absolutely. France is among the richest and safest countries in the world. We have a pretty darn good social safety net as well that covers a lot: healthcare, unemployment, etc. Now, it's been said that France is a paradise inhabited by people who think that they're in hell, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if the Yellow Vest demonstrations have shown anything, it's that as good as things look on the surface, if you drill down, well, they actually aren't for some people. In fact, many people feel that the services that they deem important for their way of life are being eroded.
There's a cultural and historical dimension to this pessimism. There's been a long-lasting and difficult relationship with the state. The state's very important in France and has been for a long time, more than elsewhere. We expect a lot from it, but today we don't trust it as much, and that could explain the pessimism we have about the future.
All right, I understand that point of view, but I don't think it's all about just chipping away at the social safety net in France. There are other things that seem to make France such a gloomy, collectively depressed place that date back centuries.
Absolutely. In fact, there are many theories on this as well. Some say it's our harsh education system that can crush people's self-confidence, or even France's relationship to work, which is seen as a major constraint instead of a lifelong adventure, if you will. Now, some go even further and say that it's actually part of French DNA. We can't help it. This gloominess has been passed on from generations for hundreds of years. We're critical people. It comes from Descartes, Voltaire, and more recently, the existentialists who made nihilism fashionable.
Now, some argue that all this pessimism actually is in that bad a thing to have.
That's right. Some argue that it's a way for us to express our identity and reject the dull sameness of globalization. Now, it's definitely a stretch from the optimism and enthusiasm that you can see in Anglo-Saxon countries, this yes attitude that some French people say is a little bit naive, because after all, a culture that values complaining is actually pointing out areas of society that need fixing or protecting, and that's why we strike. That's why we say no. Our unhappiness is actually a way for us to seek perfection. Our pessimism is idealistic, or we just love to complain.
That's a nice little optimistic spin on pessimism. Flo, thank you so much for that, French Connections. Don't forget, if you have your own questions for Flo about France or the French, you can always send her a tweet at Flo Vilmanot.